My name's Rachel, and I don't like telling people that I once hitchhiked. It's one of those things you admit, and people automatically respond with, "What were you thinking?" And honestly, I ask myself that sometimes too. But when you're stuck on the side of the road in late October, sun going down, phone at 6%, and your car coughing its last mile, you start looking at your options differently. I was 25 at the time, finishing up classes at college and working a part-time job at a bookstore. My old Honda Civic wasn't exactly dependable, but it usually did its job. Get me to work, get me to campus, and maybe out to Lucky Peak on weekends if I was feeling restless. That day, I was supposed to head back from visiting a friend outside of town, and halfway home the car sputtered, shook, then it just stalled out and left me sitting there on the shoulder in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't even a dramatic breakdown. No smoke, no explosion, just silence. I remember sitting there, staring at the dead dashboard, muttering to myself like, "Perfect, great timing, exactly what I needed." There was no service where I'd stopped. Not surprising, but frustrating. The road was a two-lane stretch with nothing around but fields. I stood outside the car with my arms crossed, trying to look like I had it under control, but really I was running through my very limited plan. Wait for someone, hope they had a phone signal, maybe beg for a ride to the nearest gas station. It wasn't long before a dusty blue pickup slowed down. The driver rolled his window halfway and called out, "Car trouble?" He looked to be in his late 40s, stocky, with thinning brown hair and a calm voice. "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. "It just died on me. No service out here." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. "I can give you a lift into town. Closest station's about 10 miles up." I didn't want to. Every safety lecture I'd ever gotten from my mom replayed in my head, but the sun was dipping fast and my options were basically non-existent. I told myself people offered rides all the time out here. This wasn't Los Angeles, this was Idaho. Folks were supposed to be decent. So I grabbed my backpack, locked the Civic, and climbed in. The cab smelled like cigarettes and something sweet. Maybe air freshener clipped to the vent. The dashboard was cluttered with receipts and fast food napkins. Not messy enough to be alarming, but enough to notice. "Appreciate it," I said, buckling in. "No problem," he replied. "Name's Rick." I told him mine. We made the usual small talk. What I studied, what I did for work, how cars always seem to break down at the worst times. He chuckled at that, said something about Murphy's Law. For the first 10 minutes, it felt almost normal. Just a stranger doing a good deed. But then I noticed something that shifted everything. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement in the back seat. At first, I thought it was just the blanket, one of those gray wool ones you see in camping stores, sliding around with the bumps in the road. But the way it bulged, the way it lifted slightly and then settled, it didn't look like fabric. It looked like someone was under it. I looked back quickly. The blanket was tucked in oddly tight along the seat, like something or someone was hidden beneath it. Rick noticed my look in the rearview mirror. He looked up, then back to the road. He didn't say anything. I forced myself to look away, trying to brush off the creeping worry. People toss all sorts of junk in their back seats. Maybe it was just gear, camping stuff, a duffel bag, anything. But then, as we slowed near an intersection, I swear I saw the blanket rise, like a chest inflating with breath. I felt a tight pull in my stomach. I tried to stay calm, running through excuses to get out. Maybe ask to stop at a gas station bathroom. Maybe say I forgot something in my car. Then the doors clicked. The locks slid down automatically, one by one. I didn't touch them. Rick didn't say a word. He just kept driving. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck as I adjusted my posture, trying not to let it show. Hey, could you drop me at the station in town? My friend's coming to meet me there. Sure, he said casually, like we were talking about the weather. Station's a bit past this stretch. I nodded, trying to look normal, but my eyes kept darting to that lump in the back. Whoever it was, they hadn't moved much, just stayed still, waiting. We hit a red light. My hand went for the door handle. Instinct. But when I tried, it wouldn't budge. Locked tight. That was the moment I realized I had to think fast. I leaned forward slightly, pressing my hand to my stomach. Oh man, I think that diner food earlier messed me up. I might throw up. Rick looked at me, skeptical. I'm serious, I said, adding a gagging sound for effect. If I don't get out, it's going to be all over your seat. He swore low and swung over toward the shoulder. The truck slowed, pulling just enough off the road. The second I heard the locks click up, I yanked the handle and bolted. I didn't look back, I just ran. Backpack bouncing, legs pumping harder than they ever had. I could hear the truck door slam behind me, but I didn't wait to see if Rick or whoever was under that blanket followed. Up ahead, thank God, was a gas station. It wasn't big, just one of those off-highway places, but it was enough. I sprinted straight inside, ignoring the stairs, and begged the clerk to call the police. By the time officers showed up, the truck was long gone. I told them everything. They took notes, asked for a description, and one of them finally said, "You're not the first to mention something like this." Apparently, there had been other reports of pairs. One driver, one hidden, trying to lure or trap hitchhikers along certain stretches near Boise. No one had been caught. That night, I sat in a diner with the police report and my hands shaking around a mug of coffee. I couldn't stop picturing that blanket. The way it had shifted, the way the person under it never showed their face. I've never hitchhiked since, won't even accept a ride from someone I don't know. I check my car obsessively now before road trips, double check my phone battery, triple check my gas. The scariest part wasn't the stranger offering help. It was the stranger I didn't see, waiting in the back seat. I was a couple days into a solo photo run through Arkansas when it happened. May 2021, everything green and damp and buzzing with insects. I'd been shooting old storefronts and weathered signs, the sort of side project I liked between paid gigs. My cooler held waters and a leftover biscuit. My camera bag was wedged under a towel in the back. That afternoon, I spotted him. Thumb out, backpack slouched by his boot, holding a cardboard sign. Toward Hazel, anywhere close. He looked like he'd been in the sun too long, cap-stained and pink skin. I slowed because that's what I do. He leaned in the window, grin quick and grateful. "You're a lifesaver," he said. "Hop in. I'm not going far, but I'll get you closer." He buckled up like someone used to catching rides. Said his name was Rob. Or Ross, I wasn't sure. He talked easy at first, about fixing small engines, about his mom living by some river I hadn't heard of. He pointed out places that used to be good and laughed at a church sign that read, "Jesus fixes what Google can't." For a while, it was nothing but harmless, small talk. We hit a construction site. A flagger stopped us, the heat rolling in through the windows. Rob tapped the dash. "Want to skip this mess? There's a cut-through." He pulled out a folded county map, soft with use. His finger traced a route, a squiggle through nowhere. Old County 8. Hang a right by the creek. You'll pop back past the construction. Easy. It felt adventurous, and I didn't feel like sitting in line. So I turned. At first, it looked like any back road. 2-lane, mailboxes shaped like tractors, tarps covering boats. Then the yards thinned, power lines disappeared, and the trees crowded in. A brown sign read, "Bridge out ahead." "We're not going that far," Rob said. "Next left." The road was 2 gray ruts in the grass. GPS gave up completely. Shortcut, he said, smiling. I eased onto it. Dust rose. Leaves brushed the mirrors. I remember thinking it was just another back road I'd forget in a week. But I noticed marker ribbons tied on trees, faded and mud-streaked. Hunting tape, maybe. You ever shoot wildlife? He asked suddenly. Not really. Shame. Out here, you just point and wait long enough, you'll see something. His voice carried a different weight now. The humming he'd been doing stopped. The ruts dipped, a white ribbon this time, a short length of chain thrown in the ditch. I invented explanations. Old survey markers, hunters, kids fooling around, but none of them settled the knot in my gut. Veer left where it looks wrong, he said, pointing. The split ahead showed 2 options. Right, brighter, still worn. Left, darker, sinking under the pines. Crushed beer cans gleamed in the weeds at the fork. How much longer? I asked. 10, he answered too quick. I steered left. The ground softened and the tires lost some grip. A faint trail cut into the woods looked like it had been stamped down, then abandoned. Crack the windows, he said. Easier to hear if anyone's coming. Coming? It echoed in my head. We rolled past a clearing. Black scars in the dirt, the imprint where something heavy had sat. This is faster, he said, but his smile was hopeful. He kept folding the map, smaller and smaller, until it looked like something he could hide in his palm. We crossed a wash. On the far side, 2 boots sat upright in the weeds, facing the trees. Not tossed, placed. I'm turning around, I said. You're fine. Another mile. I'm turning around. My hand went to the shifter. Don't. His hand didn't touch me, but it hovered like he might push it back. Forward's easier. Safer. But I eased into reverse. That's when he unbuckled. The seatbelt clicked. He shoved the door open and jumped out while the car was rolling, stumbled once, then ran toward the trees ahead. He turned long enough to throw the words at me, "You'll regret this." Then he vanished into the woods. I slammed the door shut and crawled backward, eyes flicking between the mirrors and the road. Blue ribbons reappeared, then white, then nothing. Finally, the road widened, sunlight spilling through like a lifeline. I took the other fork, the one that stayed in the light, and soon asphalt appeared, power lines sagging into view. Civilization slid back into place. At the next gas station, I filled up, though my tank was nearly full. Bought a bottle of tea and a heat lamp slice of pizza. Checked the back seat twice. Nothing there but the faint outline where he'd sat. That night, I booked a cheap motel with the door facing the lot. Deadbolt, latch, chain, all locked. I sat on the bed, eating the cold leftover biscuit from my cooler, telling myself it meant everything was normal again. But I still scanned every seam of that room. Curtain gaps, the baseboards, the rhythmic clank of the air unit. Weeks later, back home, a headline caught me. Authorities search area near Old County Road after reports of missing man. Logging roads. Creek crossing. No map, no details, just enough to know it was close to where I'd been. I thought of his map, the numbers scribbled on its edge. 2 digits, a dash, 2 more. Not miles, not grid coordinates I recognized. Maybe dates, maybe tallies. When I tell the story now, I make it small. Just a road trip anecdote. Picked up a hitchhiker, got spooked, bailed. Let people laugh, tell me that's why you don't pick them up. Easy lesson, clean ending. But when I'm alone, I remember how deliberate he'd been. He waited until I was in reverse, until I had to split my focus, then told me I'd regret it. Not a plea, not a threat, a statement. Maybe he meant I'd regret not trusting him, that the road really did loop back. Maybe he meant I'd regret crossing him. Or maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about whatever waited farther down that shaded track, something he knew better than to describe. I'll never know. What I do know is this. Whenever I see a dirt road veer left into shadow, I hear his voice again. This happened when I was 24 and working the front desk at a little hostel just off Cerrilos Road in Santa Fe. June 2017. Hot days, cool nights, and the smell of sunscreen and pancake batter always floating in the halls. The place attracted everyone. German hikers who somehow knew the bus routes better than locals, and college kids on dusty road trips. Most Tuesdays were errand days for me. I'd take the hostel's rattly Corolla to the bank, grab bulk supplies, and swing by the thrift shop that always put out blankets around noon. That's the day I picked up the man. He wasn't standing with his thumb out, more like lingering near the curb by the rail yard. Faded cap, sunburned skin, a pack with broken zippers. He didn't look like he wanted to ask for anything, but when I slowed and asked if he needed a ride, he nodded once and pointed down Guadalupe, motioning short distance with his fingers. He climbed in, buckled the seatbelt without a word, and held up a dog-eared card with an address. Near the tracks. Someone had scribbled on it. That was all. I tried small talk. Weather, where he was from, whether he knew the hostel. Nothing. He sat forward, watching the windshield like it was a screen. His silence wasn't angry. It was just complete, like words weren't an option for him. 5 minutes later, he tapped the dash, signaled right, then left, then a little circle over his knee. I pulled up by an old muffler shop turned religious trinket store. He opened the door, gave me one last look like he was checking I was real, and stepped out. No thanks, no words. He just disappeared down the side street. By the time I finished the bank run and scored a blanket with a coyote stitched on it, I'd forgotten him. Back at the hostel, I reached into my canvas tote for a spare key and felt something cold and solid at the bottom. A thumb drive. Black, scratched, no label. I knew my bag. It wasn't mine. My coworker, Nora, shrugged. Could have fallen in. Don't put it in your laptop. Use the old Dell. So later, while guests shuffled through check-in and someone asked about the swamp cooler again, I gave in to curiosity. I slid the drive into that ancient Dell in the office. Folders appeared, all named with dates. The oldest one nearly a year back. I opened it. Photos. Hundreds. Women. All of them. Hitchhikers, bus stops, gas stations, motel porches. Candid angles. Through windshields, from passenger seats, out of car windows. No one looking at the camera. No one smiling. Just women, all caught mid-step or mid-weight. The next folder, more of the same. Women with backpacks, holding signs, filling water bottles. Same angles, same perspective. Whoever took them wasn't random. They knew what they were doing. I clicked through folder after folder, waiting for something normal. A family, a building, anything. It was all women. Then I opened the top folder, the one from 2 weeks ago. The first shots were familiar. A girl with a duffel outside a coffee shop, another at a gas station, then one of the road through a windshield, light spilling across the dash. And then, me. It was a photo from the back seat, angled at the driver's side. My messy bun, a cheap blue bead bracelet, even the strip of painter's tape I used to stop the AC vent from rattling. I was caught mid-word, hand on the radio. Date stamp exactly 14 days earlier. It wasn't zoomed from another car. Whoever took it had been behind me. The next photo showed the kid I dropped off that night, backpack in his lap, stepping out of the back seat. The next showed the empty passenger side. The next, the lamplight bending over the apartments where I left him. I sat there, staring. My skin felt wrong, like I'd forgotten to close a door. I hadn't logged that ride in the hostel book. It had seemed like nothing, just helping someone too young and tired to walk across town. He'd asked to sit in the back. I hadn't thought twice. Nora found me staring at the screen. "What is that?" I showed her. Her face tightened fast. "Don't open the folder with today's date." I yanked the drive out, and we called the police. An officer came, young and trying to look older. He listened, asked questions, bagged the drive like evidence, and promised to call. He gave me a case number on the back of his card. Then he left, and that was it. That night, the hostel courtyard glowed gold in the long June light. Guests laughed, played Uno, cooked noodles on the shared stove. It all looked harmless. But every time someone walked past the window, I checked for a cap pulled low, for raw knuckles, for a face I almost recognized. The officer never called back. Since then, I can't shake the image. Me driving, unaware, someone behind me lifting a camera. The detail of it, that stupid strip of painter's tape, proved it wasn't a mistake. Now, when I give someone a ride, it's only in the front seat. And whenever a man stands in the doorway wearing a cap, I study him for just a second too long, wondering if he's the one who dropped something in my bag. I was 19 in March 2016, driving my old Toyota Yaris back to campus after visiting my aunt in Cookeville. She'd loaded me up with foil-wrapped leftovers, so my backseat smelled like pound cake and green beans. It was later than I'd planned, but I cut off the interstate onto the 2-lane anyway, telling myself it was quicker. It was one of those empty roads, lined with old churches, country radio low. And then I saw her. A girl, maybe my age, standing by the shoulder with her hands covering her face. She was crying. No car, no bag, just her in the glow of my headlights. I pulled over, rolled the window down. "Hey, you okay?" She lowered her hands. Young. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers too white for the gravel. Tears streaked across her cheeks. "Do you need a ride?" I asked. She just nodded, walked around the front of my car, and climbed in. No hesitation, stared straight ahead. "I'm going toward Knoxville," I said. "I can drop you at the next gas station." "That's fine," she said, soft, barely louder than events. I offered water from the door. She took it, sipped once, then set it in her lap. For a couple minutes, the only sound was her sniffing in the engine. Then, without any build-up, she stopped crying. Just stopped. Her face went calm, dry, still. The silence sat heavy. Then she asked, "Do you live nearby?" "On campus," I said. "Alone?" "Roommates. They're home." I lied. "They expect you?" "Yeah, my mom does too. I told her I'd text." Another lie. She tapped the water bottle cap with her thumb. "Good." We rolled past a dark side road, the kind with a name like Hollow or Fork. She pointed at it. "That way's faster." "I'll stick to the main road," I said. "Less chance of getting lost." She didn't argue, just smirked, then went quiet again. A set of headlights appeared behind us, one brighter than the other, like a truck with a tired lens. They hung back, dipped out of sight, then reappeared. I didn't notice how hard I was holding it until my hands started to ache. "What's your building called?" she asked suddenly. "Volunteer Hall," I said before I could think of a cover. She smirked again. "I stayed somewhere like that once." The gaslight flicked on. Of course it did. I told her we'd stop at the next station. She didn't reply, just turned to look at me, then back to the window. The headlights stuck in the mirror, not close, not far. I turned into the glow of a pilot travel center. Semis lined the side lot. As soon as the concrete rolled under the tires, she unbuckled. "I'm just fueling," I said. "You need anything?" She didn't answer. She opened the door before I'd even stopped, slid out and walked quickly across the lot. She didn't look back, She rounded the corner of the building and vanished. I sat there, stunned, then got out and fueled. Inside, the clerk asked, "Pump?" I told him 2, then asked if he'd seen a girl. "The one crying?" he said. "Yeah, happens sometimes. Folks say she tests people, cries, gets in, then starts asking questions. Sometimes she leads drivers down the back roads, sometimes there's trucks waiting. Don't know if it's her choice or someone else's. Either way, you're smart to stop here." I left with a coffee I didn't want, fueled, and texted my mom that I was heading the rest of the way on the highway. The rest of the drive was wrong quiet. Every set of headlights in the mirror felt like that uneven truck until it passed and turned into a family sedan. By the time I reached campus, I felt wrung out, like I'd worked a shift I hadn't signed up for. A week later, back in Cookville, a man at another gas station warned me without me even asking, "Don't take the county roads at night. There's a girl who checks if you'll be missed, leads some folks where they shouldn't go." Maybe the crying was bait. Maybe the questions were her way of measuring whether I was safe or expendable. Or maybe she was trapped in something herself, testing drivers to decide who she could risk involving. I stick to the highway now. I fill up before the light nags me, and whenever I pass a shoulder with someone hunched over in the dark, I drive to the nearest lot with lights, call non-emergency, and let someone else check. Because that night when she turned to me and asked, "Do they expect you?" it didn't sound like small talk. It sounded like a checklist. And I don't ever want to know what would have happened if I'd answered wrong. In June 2019, I was on the road between Austin and Colorado Springs for a break I'd convinced myself I deserved. My car was loaded the way I always pack it. Cooler under a towel, almonds in a baggie, laptop buckled into the back seat like a kid. Podcasts queued, directions folded under the visor just in case my phone decided to update at the wrong time. Past Amarillo, the land turned into a flat truth of wind turbines and sky arguments. I'd been on the road for hours when I saw him, a man standing by a cattle guard, hat brim curved, backpack at his feet. I did the math, the same math I always do. Mid-morning, empty road, sunlight too bright for tricks. I pulled over. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Up a bit," he said, soft voice, not much accent. I let him in. He sat carefully, placed his backpack on the floor. He thanked me, but never gave his name. What he did give me was unease. Not by words, by where he looked. Not at me, not out the windshield, but at the rear window. Over and over, steady as breathing. "Bad run-in with cops?" I tried. "No," he said, "just making sure we're all right." He said it like it was a threat wrapped in politeness. We passed fence posts strung with old sneakers, a panhandle kind of shoe tree. I mentioned it. "Markings," he said, and kept watching that glass. After 20 minutes, I realized no one else had passed us. No cars coming at us, no trucks in the mirror. Nothing. That doesn't happen out there. I checked the odometer, my phone's blue dot, anything. Still just us. I tried to laugh it off. "Busy day, huh?" He finally spoke. "You see them yet?" "See who?" I asked. "They'll show," he said, eyes still on the glass. Another 10 miles. Still empty. My phone bars dropped to none. The radio faded into static and preachers muttering about storms. I started counting minutes like a kid afraid of the dark. I asked if he wanted me to drop him at the next stop. He looked at me then, really looked, eyes pale gray, and said, "Don't stop on the road. Go where there are lights. You'll know it when you see it." It took another 15 minutes, but then a blue sign. "Safety rest area, 1 mile." I turned without hesitation. "This fine?" I asked. He didn't answer. He seemed calmer, though, like a man whose bus was finally arriving. I pulled in under the curved roofs and parked near the picnic tables. turned to him, he was looking straight at me now, not at the glass. His eyes were pale enough to catch the dashboard glow. For the first time, he spoke more than a few clipped words. "You remind me of my sister," he said softly, like he was remembering her instead of telling me. "She used to drive this stretch at night and swore the road could listen. She's gone now, but I still hear her when the wind shifts. Maybe you've heard her too." I didn't know what to say. He kept going, calm, like a man unspooling a memory he'd been saving for the right ear. "My father said no road is ever empty. Even when you don't see the others, they're there, watching, waiting. Some of them ahead, some of them behind, and some above. My family's all scattered now, but I walk with them still. That's why I look back." He nodded at the rear glass, then back at me. "Don't mistake quiet for safety." Then he unbuckled the belt. He opened the door, stepped out, and shut it with that same gentle push he'd used when I picked him up. No look back, no goodbye. He just adjusted the strap of his backpack and walked across the lot toward the shadowed edge of the building, folding into the ordinary world like he'd been part of it all along. I sat there, staring at the passenger window. Inside the rest stop, families moved through the tornado displays, kids tugging sleeves, a couple arguing over a map. Life looked normal again, like it had been set up for me to rejoin after a scene I wasn't supposed to witness. At the gas station across the access road, the cashier asked, "Pump?" I asked if he'd seen a man walk through. He frowned, thought about it, and shook his head. Back on the highway, the silence broke. Trucks, minivans, a highway patrol. As if it had been like that the whole time. Later, when I told my sister, I gave her the light version. Picked up a man, got spooked, dropped him at a stop. She laughed and blamed the murder shows I watch. I laughed too, because it was easier than explaining his words. Don't mistake quiet for safety. And I can't stop replaying his face when he asked me, "You see them yet?" Not behind us, not in the mirror. The rear glass had been reflecting the sky. But some nights, I look at my own rear window. Not to check for who's behind me. To check if anyone or anything is above. Waiting for someone willing to look up. If you thought the real danger wasn't the hitchhiker, but the fact that the ride kept going way too long, smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and tell me in the comments, would you have pulled over? And if you've ever wondered what kind of story actually shook me, not just my viewers. Click now to watch 4 stories that genuinely messed me up when I first read them. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.
I have been in a long-distance relationship for a year now, and my boyfriend and I have discussed our desire to be married within this year. He lives 3 hours away from me in a big city in Kentucky, and I live in a suburb outside Cincinnati. This is important to mention. Because of our religious reasons, we are choosing not to live together until after we are married. So the solution of just moving in together, unfortunately, is not an option for us right now. We see each other probably 2 to 3 times a month, usually alternating who drives to visit who. And while the distance is definitely hard sometimes, we've made it work pretty well so far. We're both pretty established where we are. He's got a really good job in Louisville, and I'm working at a hospital here while finishing up some certifications. The wedding planning has been a bit stressful, trying to coordinate everything from different cities, but that's a whole other story. Now, his parents own several properties, including one in the middle of the woods that sits on like 40 acres nestled in between these huge ridges. And in the valley sits this beautiful cabin, right next to a creek that honestly sounds amazing when you're trying to fall asleep. The cabin is surprisingly large, with 5 bedrooms and tons of windows. Like almost every room has at least 2 big windows, which I love for the natural light. But here's the weird part. It has so many entrances and exits, 6 doors in total that go outside. There's the main front and back door, but then there's also doors off the master bedroom. One off the kitchen that goes to a side porch, and 2 more that I think were added later when they expanded the cabin. This has literally always been my dream to own land like this, and to homestead and raise my children in a more wild, natural setting away from the suburbs. However, several steps have to come before that can happen, including me staying there for a short period of time by myself to kind of test it out and see if it's realistic. Which honestly is pretty daunting when I really think about it. The closest neighbor is probably a mile away, and cell service is spotty at best. Now my lease is coming up at the end of next month, and instead of renewing for another year in the city, and pushing off the wedding even longer, my plan is to actually move into the cabin and live separate from my boyfriend for a short time until we get married. We're thinking maybe 3 to 4 months max, because his work schedule is absolutely insane, and honestly the cabin needs a lot of work done to it before it's really move-in ready. Like deep cleaning, since no one's lived there full time in probably 2 years. His parents have mostly used it for weekend getaways. Plus being 3 hours from his office would be impossible for him during the week. Whereas I can do most of my hospital shifts closer to the cabin, since there's actually a decent regional hospital about 25 minutes away that's been hiring. So logistically, it just makes way more sense for me to be the one staying there. At least that's what we keep telling ourselves. The first week is honestly kind of perfect. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was nervous about being out here alone, but it's been so peaceful, it's almost surreal. I've been FaceTiming my boyfriend every night, and he keeps joking that I look too relaxed. His parents dropped by on day 3 with some supplies and to check on me, which was sweet. But I did have one weird moment though. On the 4th night, I could have sworn I heard someone walking around outside, like footsteps on the gravel near the side door. But when I turned on the porch light, there was nothing there. Probably a deer or something. I'm still getting used to all the normal forest sounds. Okay, so this is probably nothing, but things have been a little strange this week. Not scary strange, just off. The woods have these periods where they go completely silent, like unnaturally silent. And it usually happens around dusk and lasts for maybe 20 minutes. And during that time, I get this weird feeling like I shouldn't go outside. I can't really explain it better than that. Just this instinct to stay inside with the doors locked until the sounds come back. Also, I've been finding these tracks around the cabin. They're in the mud near the creek and around the perimeter of the house. At first, I thought they were bear tracks because they're big, but they're not quite right. They're almost like human footprints, but longer, and the toes are weird, too long and spread out. And there are claw marks at the tips. My boyfriend thinks I'm just not used to identifying animal tracks, and that they're probably just from a big raccoon or something. And he's probably right. The other thing, and this is the part that actually bothered me, is that food has gone missing. Like I bought a pack of chicken breasts and put them in the fridge, and 2 days later, there were only 3 instead of 5. Then 3 nights ago, I heard my boyfriend's voice calling me from the woods. I was getting ready for bed around 10 p.m. when I heard it.
Babe, can you help me?
Coming from outside, from the direction of the creek. My heart literally jumped, because I thought maybe he'd driven down to surprise me, but his car wasn't there. I called out to the door. "Matt, is that you?" And the voice responded,
Yeah, I'm down by the creek. I think I twisted my ankle. Can you come help me?
I was literally reaching for my shoes when I realized my phone was buzzing. It was Matt.
Hey, sorry, just got out of a meeting. How was your day?
I couldn't speak for a second, because I could still hear the other voice outside calling,
Babe, please, it really hurts.
I told Matt what was happening, and he got really quiet, and then very firmly told me to lock all the doors, stay inside, and stay on the phone with him. The voice outside kept calling for maybe 10 more minutes, getting increasingly frustrated before it finally stopped. Matt thinks maybe it was someone playing a prank, or possibly a neighbor who needed help, and coincidentally sounded like him. But we don't have close neighbors. The nearest house is over a mile away, and it sounded exactly like him. I haven't heard it since, but I'm not gonna lie. I've been keeping all the lights on at night. My name is Lucas, and I am 16. I live in Pennsylvania, near the Appalachian Mountain Range. As a kid growing up, we would always go up to my uncle's cabin in the mountains that we also hunted at. There is a long driveway leading up to the cabin and a big parking area with a spotlight looking down on it. It was in late November and the night before the first day of whitetail buck season, so we had our regular get-together at the cabin. My dad and uncles were sitting around the fire pit, talking about where they'd set up in the morning. I remember the smell of wood smoke and coffee mixing together. We always stayed up late that night, too excited to sleep much anyway. There was a lot of drinking going on, so I kind of distanced myself from all of it and went outside to take a smoke break. As I walked outside, I will never forget the sound I heard. It was a mix between an animal in distress and almost a creepy laugh. It came from somewhere down near the tree line, echoing off the mountains. I am easily scared and quickly went back inside. I didn't say anything to anyone because I figured they'd just make fun of me or blame it on the beer. After a while, the others went to sleep, and it was just me still awake. The cabin was quiet, except for my uncle's snoring from the back room. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, trying to convince myself it was just a fox or something. Now I suffer from sleep insomnia, and my mind races all night. I was thinking about something random, when all of a sudden, I heard the same noise I had heard before and was very disturbed. It was louder this time and closer to the cabin. My stomach dropped and I pulled the blanket up higher. I eventually fell asleep and woke up the next morning ready to go hunting. We got done hunting, and I forgot all about it by that evening after supper. My dad had gotten a nice 8-pointer, so everyone was in good spirits. Night comes along again, and once again, the older people I was with were slamming beers back, so I just played on my phone. Then one of the guys then went out and didn't come back for a while. So my dad told me to go check on him. As I walked outside, I saw him standing next to my dad's car and yelled, "Hey, we were wondering where you went off to." But then I nearly shit a brick as I heard a voice behind me say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for my playing cards in my truck." I whipped around, and there he was, coming from the complete opposite direction. My blood went cold. I looked back at the figure by the car, but it was gone. Just empty space under that spotlight.
Give the gift of bird feeding this holiday with a seed character like Olive the Owl, available exclusively at Wild Birds.
Did you see that? I stammered. He told me I must have seen the shadow of a tree or something. He is a Christian and refuses to believe in that kind of thing. He just patted my shoulder and went back inside. So the next morning, we hear a shot ring out and come to find my uncle has shot a deer. We help him collect it and clean it and hang it up so we can butcher it. It was a doe, pretty decent sized. We strung it up on the old metal rack behind the cabin, the same one we'd used for years. They then all celebrated by drinking, and I was once again left out. It was around 4 p.m. now, so we were about to eat, when my uncle said something. He said, "That's funny. I could have sworn I put the chops over by the grill to cook, but shook it off as being a coyote or something." We all looked around, but didn't see anything dragged off, or tracks. So we ate our supper, and once again, it was nighttime, and we were all getting ready to go to bed again. The cabin felt colder than usual, even with the wood stove going. I helped clean up the dishes while my dad and uncles argued about football. That uneasy feeling from the night before started creeping back into my chest. Again, I couldn't sleep, so I sat up on my phone and played games. I forgot to mention that whenever my uncle shoots a deer, he throws all the guts into a pit we call the feeding trough, as there are a lot of coyotes in the area. Just a way of giving back to the wildlife, I guess. It's about 50 yards into the woods, down a little slope. Anyway, I was laying up in bed when I heard that same noise again. It sounded farther away, and I wasn't worried about going and taking a look outside to maybe try and put an image to this strange and creepy noise I was hearing. I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight from the kitchen. Everyone else was out cold, snoring away. So I looked out the front door and I saw it. And I thought it was a coyote at first, but it then stood up. It was looking straight at me. I couldn't see its face, but I could see shadows coming from the top of its head, which I perceived to be horns. The thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. I didn't move a muscle, afraid it would come charging at the door. My hand was frozen on the doorknob. It stared at the cabin for a good minute or so, before just vanishing. It didn't get down and trot off. It just disappeared. I told my dad what happened the next morning, and again, he denied it being anything supernatural. He just said I had an overactive imagination and needed more sleep. Luckily, that was the last night I was staying there, and the next day, I went online to Google anything that had any similarities to what I saw. I guess it could have been a skinwalker or a wendigo, but I was never able to put a name to it. It still creeps me out to this day, and even though my uncle has sold that cabin since, I will never step foot in those mountains again. I am still scared to even look out my window at night, especially if it's dark outside. I never want to see anything like that again. I know this sounds crazy, but my boyfriend Jake and I were staying at my uncle's cabin near Lake Superior. It was around 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and we were leaving early so I could drive him to his construction job in Duluth. While we were going down the gravel road, probably doing like 15 miles per hour, I caught something moving out of the corner of my eye near the tree line, and I slammed on my brakes without even thinking. And on the side of the road was this creature. I don't even know what else to call it. It walked slowly out in front of my Jeep, just staring at us, like it didn't care at all that we saw it. The thing was huge, probably around 6 or 7 feet tall, or maybe taller, and it was hunched over with these long arms that literally dragged on the ground. It was extremely pale, like sickly white, and so skinny you could see its ribs poking through the skin. Completely hairless, not a single hair anywhere. My headlights were shining right on it, but I honestly don't remember making out what its face looked like, which is the weirdest part because I was staring right at it. It moved so slowly, almost like it was in no rush. As it passed the front of my vehicle, it went behind someone's old Subaru parked at another cabin across the little dirt road I was on, which is the only way in and out of there. It just stood there watching as I drove away. I didn't even say anything to Jake. I just hit the gas. After that day, I obviously refused to stay there again, but my father still did. He's super skeptical about everything, and obviously didn't believe me at first. Thought I was being dramatic, or saw a deer or something. But then things started happening to him too. My dad told me maybe 2 weeks later he heard something big running across the roof one night, like heavy footsteps going back and forth. On another occasion, he heard this loud knock on the bathroom window, like 3 solid bangs. That window is about 10 feet off the ground with nothing underneath it, no porch or anything. Of course, he ran outside, and again, no one was there. No ladder, no logs stacked up. Nothing that could have been used to reach that high. My ex and I were the only ones that ever actually saw the thing itself. Nobody else at the other cabins ever mentioned anything, which is strange. Anyone have any insight on what I saw? I've been questioned before, like, why didn't you just run it over? Honestly, I didn't feel threatened by it in that moment. It's weird, but it felt like it was just curious, observing us. Also, I was completely in shock. During the summer, I work at a camp in Janesville, Wisconsin. The staff cabins are pretty basic, just screens on the windows and doors, so you can literally hear everything happening outside. One night around 11:30 p.m., my roommate and I walked over to the showers. We got back to our cabin about an hour later, around 12:30 a.m. She was exhausted and passed out right away in her bed. My ADHD had me wide awake, so I popped in my earbuds around 1 a.m. with the volume down low so I wouldn't disturb her. That's when I heard it. This weird screaming sound in the distance. Sounded like a fox or maybe coyotes. I'm a total nature nerd, so instead of being freaked out, I actually got excited. I've always had this creepy feeling that something's watching me at night when I walk back from the showers alone. It's about a 10-minute walk through the dark, and it's not like I think it's an animal or a person. It's just this weird, heavy feeling that makes me super uneasy. Even with a flashlight in my hand, my stomach drops and my throat gets tight. I absolutely hate being outside alone at night because of it. That's why I always try to get someone to walk with me. It's just this gut feeling I can't shake. Anyway, we didn't actually run the camp this past summer because attendance numbers dropped really badly. Not enough kids signed up, so they had to cancel the whole season. So I ended up working at the BSA camp in our council instead. And honestly, it was such a different vibe there. I never felt like I was being watched or followed by anything supernatural or creepy. The only real concern was the ridiculous skunk population. Those guys were everywhere. But anyway, back to that night. Like I said, I love hearing coyotes and foxes howling in the distance. But around 1:30 a.m., everything changed. I heard this human-like, high-pitched screaming that went on for maybe 15 seconds. Then it shifted into this deep, guttural growl, mixed with this awful screeching sound. The whole thing lasted about 30 seconds total, all in one continuous breath. It wasn't spaced out like how foxes or coyotes call. I'm pretty good at judging distance when it comes to sounds, and I swear this thing couldn't have been more than 30 feet from our cabins. When I tell you the fear that shot through me, it was instant. My whole body went ice cold, and I was suddenly wide awake, like I'd chugged 12 cups of coffee in one go. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding, fully expecting to see something standing at my screen door just staring at me through the mesh. But there was nothing there, just darkness. Then I heard it. This loud, heavy thumping sound, like a horse galloping at full speed. But here's the thing that made it even worse. It sounded like it was running on 2 legs, not 4. I jumped out of bed and bolted the door as fast as I could. I mean, logically, I knew a flimsy bolt on a screen door wasn't going to stop anything, but it made me feel safer somehow. My hands were shaking the whole time. I honestly thought I was losing my mind until I heard my friend in the cabin right next to mine whisper urgently through the screen, "Hey, did you hear that too?" The cabins are super close together, practically right on top of each other, so we could hear each other pretty clearly. But the panic in his voice, that's what really got me. That's when I knew for sure I wasn't dreaming or imagining things. I don't think anyone else heard it though. Most of the guys are crazy heavy sleepers, and my roommate had her earplugs in like always. It was just me and him, wide awake and terrified. For the rest of that summer, I was obsessed with figuring out what the hell that thing was. I wanted answers so badly, but there was a huge problem. Poison ivy was absolutely everywhere in the area where the sound came from, like seriously thick patches of it covering the ground. Neither me nor anyone else was willing to risk trudging through it to look for footprints or any other signs. It just wasn't worth getting covered in that miserable rash. I had this whole plan to set up a trail camera in that exact spot before the next summer, hoping to catch whatever it was on film. But then 2020 hit, and camp got canceled again because attendance numbers were still terrible. So I never got the chance to go back out there and set anything up. The whole thing just remained this unsolved mystery that still bugs me. This whole thing happened back in summer 2019. Over the past 5 years I've been working there, we've found some really disturbing stuff in the woods. Like absolutely shredded deer carcasses scattered around, torn up turkeys, and sometimes just the insides of what looked like smaller animals. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what the hell I heard that night, because honestly, it's haunted me ever since. I can't let it go. I've listened to recordings of every animal native to Wisconsin. Bears, wolves, cougars, you name it. Nothing even comes close to matching that sound. There's just no way it was any normal animal I've ever heard before. It was something else entirely.
visiting some family for a couple of days finds himself in a cold and eerie loft. But he soon wakes up to find he is not alone up there. Something from outside has decided to join him. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, here to tell you stories of the unknown from real people like you. Today's stories feature dogman encounters, disturbing shadows, and visages from the end of the world that you do not want to see. If you have a scary story of the unknown and you want to hear it on this show, send it to me at darkstories.org. Help us grow by finding Unexplained Encounters on your favorite podcast app and leaving us a follow. Or subscribe to Darkness Prevails on YouTube and give this episode a thumbs up. Thank you. Now, let's begin. I hate lofts. From Sir Loft-A-Lot. My apartment was being fumigated for bed bugs. The whole building had them thanks to the couple in 3B, who I won't specifically name, who had brought back infested furniture from a yard sale. 2 days, they said, we'd need to be out. Most people went to hotels, but my brother Garrett and his wife Lynn offered to let me crash at their place. Fair warning, Garrett said when he picked me up. You'll be in the loft. It's not exactly the Ritz either. He wasn't kidding. Their house was one of those split-level deals from the 70s, and the loft was this converted attic space above the garage. You got to it through a pull-down ladder in the hallway. It had been Garrett's home office before he started working from the kitchen table like everyone else. The space itself wasn't so bad. It was decent-sized with wood floors, and it even had built-in shelves along one wall. But it was cold as heck up there, even though it was just September. The insulation was garbage, and there was this massive circular window, maybe 4 feet across, that faced the backyard. One of those architectural features that looks cool but makes no practical sense. And the window doesn't lock, Lynn apologized, handing me blankets. Actually, it doesn't even latch either. Just lean something against it if the wind picks up. The window opened outward on hinges, and sure enough, when I pushed it, it swung open easily. Looking out, I could see their backyard. It was a big garden area that Lynn was always posting photos of on Instagram. There was this heavy wooden lattice covered in ivy that ran up the back wall of the house, ending just below the window. It looked sturdy enough to hold a person, though at the time I couldn't imagine why anyone would want to climb it. My nephews, 8-year-old Dustin and 6-year-old Cameron, thought it was hilarious that Uncle Pete was sleeping in the treehouse, as they called it. They helped me haul up my air mattress and bag. Then Lynn shooed them off to get ready for bed. Their rooms were directly below the loft, on the second floor of the house. That first night, I set up my makeshift bed in the middle of the room, right under the sloped ceiling. I had my phone, a bottle of water, and a book. Once I was settled in, it was pretty cozy, actually, even though it was deathfully cold. I could hear the family moving around below me. There was running water and muffled TV sounds. Could even hear the kids arguing about something. Normal, happy house noise. At around midnight, I woke up needing to go pee. I had had too much coffee at dinner. The house was quiet now. Everyone was probably in bed. I made my way down the ladder carefully, trying my best to avoid making it creak. I used the bathroom on the second floor and washed my hands. Then I headed back up. When I got back to the loft, my water bottle was on its side by the window. I distinctly remembered leaving it next to my pillow standing up. The window, as well, was open about 3 inches. I assumed I must have knocked the bottle over when I got up. Didn't notice it. Maybe the temperature change had made the window swing open a little bit. Old houses do weird things, and pressure and all that. I closed it, then hung my backpack over the inner handles, which were, I guess, useless, hoping it would weigh it down, to keep it from opening on its own. Then I went back to sleep. At around 3 a.m., a scratching noise woke me up. Sounded like some sort of animal was moving around in the backyard, rustling through Lynn's garden. Probably possums. Garrett had mentioned they'd been getting into the compost bin. I heard the sound move closer to the house, and I heard what sounded like claws on wood. Whatever it was had found the lattice. The climbing sound continued, slowly, not the quick scurrying of a raccoon or possum. This one sounded heavy. The lattice creaked under some weight. I lay there staring at the dark circle of the window, waiting for some sort of masked face to appear and scare the living daylights out of me. But nothing showed up. The climbing sounds stopped right below the window. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, they began to descend again. Whoever it was, whatever it was, changed its mind. I heard it moving through the garden after that, followed by nothing. Truthfully, I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned hearing animals in the yard. Lynn and Garrett exchanged a quick look. "Yeah, we get all kinds of wildlife here," Lynn said, focusing on her eggs. "Usually possums or deer." "Big possums," Garrett added. "Some of them are huge." Dustin piped up. "Tell them about the—" "Finish your cereal," Lynn cut him off. "You're going to be late for school otherwise." I spent the day out of the house, killing time at coffee shops and the library, not looking forward to another night in that loft, even though there was just one more night. When I got back after dinner, Garrett had put a space heater up there. "Figured he might be kinda cold," he said. "Last night in the loft, then back to your own bed tomorrow, huh?" I nodded my head and thanked him. That night I was exhausted. I had barely slept the night before, and the space heater made the loft feel really comfortable. I decided to set up my air mattress in the corner, away from that window. If something wanted to climb up and look in, it wouldn't see me right away. I hung my backpack over the handles again, and around 11, book still in my hand, I dozed off. The noise that woke me up wasn't scratching this time. It was breathing. Deep breaths that weren't coming from below or outside. It was coming from in the loft. I opened my eyes without moving my head at all. From my corner, I could see most of the room in the dim light from the street lamp outside. The circular loft window was wide open. Something was crawling across the floor. It moved on all fours, unlike any animal I'd ever known. The limbs were very long, bending too soon or too late, I couldn't tell. And whatever it was covered all over in dark fur. The head was massive, too big for the thin neck, and elongated in a way that made my stomach all acidic and nauseous. It was sniffing quietly as it moved, head low to the ground, following some trail across the floor that I couldn't see. When it reached my water bottle, still where I'd left it by my pillow from the first night, it picked it up. It picked it up like a man, with a hand, or what looked like a hand. I could clearly see that what it was using to grab that bottle had opposable thumbs, but those thumbs were twice as long as mine, at least, each ending in a thick, dark nail. The creature examined the bottle, turning it over, then set it down carefully. Then it continued to move toward the ladder opening. It moved to the edge and peered down into the hallway below. The way its neck extended, stretching to look down, made me want to close my eyes and pretend I was only dreaming. But I couldn't really look away. It was studying the hallway, head tilting back and forth. Then it started to lower itself down, backwards, those long fingers gripping the edge of the opening. The kids' rooms were down there, Dustin and Cameron sleeping, with this thing about to crawl down into their hallway. I tried to scream, but nothing came out at first, nothing more than a wheeze of terror. The thing's head then snapped toward me, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It was like a wolf's face, stretched and flattened, and its eyes reflected light like a dog's, and they were focused directly on me. I found my voice then, and screamed, really screamed, as loud as I could. That thing moved faster than anything that size should be able to. It rose up right away on two legs, slamming its head into the sloped ceiling with a crack that sounded like bone or wood. It made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a screech, but something between the two that I could feel deep in my chest. Then it scrambled for the window, those awkwardly long limbs flailing and knocking over everything in its path. It went through the window head first, and I heard the lattice groaning and snapping under its weight as it went down. By the time I got to the window to look out, the backyard was empty. Garrett was up the ladder 30 seconds later with a baseball bat. Lynn was right behind him. I could hear the kids crying downstairs, frightened due to my scream. I told Garrett and Lynn everything, my words tumbling out in a rush while I was still shaking. They didn't laugh at me, though, and they told me it was no dream. Lynn got teary-eyed as she told me. We've seen it 3 times now, in the backyard. It's always after dark. We never thought it would climb the lattice. We didn't think it would come inside, Garrett added, staring at the open window. They'd been telling themselves it was someone's escaped exotic pet. Maybe a sick bear, anything that made sense. They'd even called animal control once, but of course nothing showed up during the day. Garrett looked at me sternly and said, "Don't you let them kids think it was anything else but a possum. You hear me? Uncle Pete saw a big possum and it scared him, and they'll buy that, and they'll be sleeping just fine. I'll be taking down that lattice." He looked at Lynn then, probably assuming she'd be disappointed at the idea, but she was nodding rapidly. "And," she looked at me, "we're gonna get bars on that window as soon as possible. Bars on all the windows if we have to." She looked back at Garrett. Well, they did more than just bars. They moved next week. They told everyone it was for the kids, for better schools or something like that. That wasn't entirely untrue. It was for the kids, because before they left, Garrett told me they had found scratch marks on the kids' window screens. The Return of the Shadow in the Dark, from Gearhead 993. I recently wrote into the show earlier this year, sharing a story that actually got featured, regarding a paranormal incident that I experienced when I was very young. The episode in question was the March 5th episode, titled Dragged into the Woods, on Unexplained Encounters. About 30-ish minutes in, you'll find Shadows in the Dark, a story that will now live on in infamy. You see, I've always been the type to believe that things always happen for a reason, never by chance. Since that day I wrote in, I've been looking over my shoulder a little more than usual. It seems everywhere I turn I catch a glimpse of something, but only for a split second, then it's gone again. Sometimes a whisper, other times more physical, like a breathing down your neck kind of thing that sends shivers down your spine. Or like I'm being followed by someone, or in this case, something. As of writing this, it's been about 8-ish weeks since the incident took place. It was a Friday. My fiancé and I had gotten off work. We dropped the kiddo off with the grandparents, and we were off to DoorDash for the afternoon. It had been a pretty satisfying night, making a little over $100 in just the couple of hours we were out. Overall, pretty solid. No whispers, no breathing down the neck. I'd almost forgotten about it. Almost. We got home around 9:45, just before the rain hit. The weatherman called for isolated storms throughout the evening. Imagine that. Perfect night for paranormal activity, right? I mean, you couldn't script a Hollywood movie better than this. At about 10:38, I got up to go to the restroom. South Park was playing on the TV. If memory serves, it was the episode where Mackie loses it over the deuces in the boys' urinal. As I walked to the bathroom, the lights began to flicker off and on. I quickly realized I had left my phone on the armrest of the couch, so I turned back to grab it for a light in case the power went out before I could get back. I made my way down the hallway just past my daughter's bedroom when there was a flash of lightning outside the house, knocking out the lights. followed by a loud crack of thunder that shook the entire home. A moment later, the generator kicked on, restoring the power back to normal. And then I heard my fiancée scream, so I ran back to make sure she was okay. That's when I saw it. There, standing in our front doorway, was the Shadow. The same Shadow man I'd seen years ago as a kid. He was wearing a dark fedora like before, and even had the cane as well, down to the very same piercing red eyes. Only this time, my fiancée saw it too. Now, I need to stop here and point out that up until this point, somewhere inside me I've always felt like the paranormal only affects those that the anomalies tie themselves to. But in this moment, I couldn't have been more wrong about anything in my life. Everything inside me told me to tell my fiancée to run, but I just stood there, frozen in place like a deer in headlights. I was shocked by the sight of what stood before me. My past had finally caught up with me, and now I had a decision to make. Fight or flight? What's it going to be? After what felt like an eternity, I got up the courage to speak. "What do you want? Why have you come back?" I paused, waiting for a response. But it stood there staring at me with burning red eyes, staring into my soul. After a brief pause, I spoke again, demanding to know what it wanted. This time, the Shadow raised its cane and pointed it in my direction, as if to answer, "You." My fiancée, in a panic, jumped up and tried to run to safety. But the Shadow lifted its cane once again, and suddenly all the doors in the house closed with one mighty bang. At this moment, I knew I needed some kind of weapon, and happened to remember I kept one of those bug assault pump-action rifles in the kitchen. I glanced over, and it was within reach on the counter to my right. I made a mad dash and grabbed it, gave it a quick pump. The Shadow lunged in my direction, moving faster than my eyes could follow. It reached out to grab my throat, and I squeezed the trigger. Bam! Square in the torso. There was this shrieking sound, and then it vanished. I looked around waiting for the entity to reappear, but it was quiet. I glanced over and my fiancée was hiding underneath her vanity in the next room, over in the den. "You all right?" I asked. "Do I look all right?" she yelled. "What the heck even was that?" I paused and said, "It's a long story. I've been dealing with shadows on and off my whole life. I think tonight's the only time someone else has seen it." She gave me this look and said, "This is crazy. I've never been through anything like this before." She then put her face in her hands and began to cry. I held her as tight as I could and gave her as much comfort as I could. Suddenly, a million thoughts raced into my mind. Was I going to lose her over a curse? What does this entity even want with me? A few days after the incident, I consulted with my psychiatrist, who referred me to a parapsychologist who specializes in paranormal investigation, who seems to think that I may in fact be the subject of a possible possession attempt. Since then, I've consulted with a number of religious and spiritual advisors who have performed a cleanse on my home and placed some protective objects around the home for safety. I've since taken the religious route in fighting this entity, whoever or whatever it may be. For now, there has not been another incident with the Shadow. Have we seen the last of this sinister spook? Time will tell. And one thing I know for certain, I could go the rest of my life without having to see it again. I hope it wasn't her. From Keiki Loney. My name is Kay, and I want to share a story that happened in 2013, which I vividly remember. I'm not sure if this will make it into the podcast, but if it does, I hope anyone listening believes this story, because it did happen to me. For starters, I'll give you a layout of the town I was born in, where everyone knew each other, and all the houses were really close together. There was a long stretch of road that led up the street and down the street. Back then, my town had neither mobile phones nor vehicles. It was a very rural town, where all the kids would play outside and gather together to play tag and other things. The older people told us many tales. Tales like El Cadejo, El Jinete Sin Cabeza, the Headless Horseman, La Carreta Chiona, the Creaking Cart, and many others. But one that mainly stuck with me was La Ciguanaba, which is an urban legend from El Salvador. Many people know her, and many of us fear her. There have been sightings of her around Central America. La Ciguanaba was a beautiful woman who married a soldier and had a child with this soldier. The soldier was found in bed by the wife with another woman. The wife was furious and lashed out at her husband, killing both him and his mistress. Later on, she abandoned her child in a banana plantation where his lifeless body was found. After they found the victims' bodies, they found hers, and she became a restless spirit who haunts the streets of El Salvador, hunting drunk men and cheaters. Well, let me tell you my story now. One afternoon, I went to visit my aunt who lived down the street from our home, around 6 or 7 houses down the street. She and I were close, almost like sisters. She had left home due to my grandmother's strict behavior and abuse. I lived with my grandma due to my parents being in the U.S. My aunt's house was a very beautiful home surrounded by trees. Her home was built like an L shape, where in the middle she had this big tree, which I believe was called a ceiba or ceiba tree. You can look it up. It's quite big. I was always somewhat afraid of that tree due to how big it was. That afternoon I left early, around 1, and my grandma had told me to return before sundown, due to all the violence that was happening in El Salvador at the time. Well, of course, I had lost track of time. By the time I realized, the sun had already set behind the hills. I knew my grandma was going to be extremely upset if I didn't get home. I was on my way to say goodbye to my aunt when I heard my name being called. Now, I've got a very unique name, and not everyone's familiar with it, nor do folks usually know how to pronounce it. So I was caught off guard thinking it was my aunt. I ignored it and went looking for my aunt. Once I found her, I asked her if she had called out my name. She gave me an odd look and told me she in fact had not. I explained to her how I had lost track of time and that I should head home. She told me to spend the night, as it was pretty dark by then. I told her I couldn't because of my grandma. My aunt reassured me it should be fine. She would explain to my grandma the next day. But I insisted, so she finally gave in and she told me to wait for her. She was going to go look for a flashlight so I could walk back home with it. Once she had gone back inside, I went to walk out to the front of the house, looking at the tree, thinking about how much trouble I was in, when I heard my name being called once more. Of course, I thought it was my aunt again. I replied, "Yes?" But there was no reply back. Then again, I heard my name being called for the second time. I looked around, but nobody was around until I looked at the tree. There she was, a woman peeping her head out behind the tree, smiling with her long black hair covering her pale skin. I stared at her, frozen in terror. I then took off running to look for my aunt. I bumped into her husband. He asked me what was going on, what was wrong. I explained to him how I'd seen someone behind the big tree. He reassured me it was nothing, that I had just imagined it. I told him I didn't imagine it, that I had seen an actual woman of some sort behind the tree. He then grabbed his flashlight and told me he was going to take a look. I followed him, but I stayed within close reach of the door, just in case. Once he got near the tree, he said there was no one there, that I had possibly just imagined it, out of fear of walking back home in the dark alone. Maybe that was the case, but I so clearly remember the woman's creepy smile and her long black hair. After that encounter, my aunt and her husband decided to walk me back home. Not long after, though, when I visited their home again, that tree had been cut down. My aunt said it was because it was too dangerous to have such a big tree near the house due to storms, but I don't fully believe that. At this point, I'm sure they both saw something. The Creature by the Fence. From Athletic Hunter 934. To this day, I don't know what I saw, but whatever it was, it has been burned into my mind. I was 18 years old when this happened. It was the opening day of rifle season in Wisconsin. It had snowed the day before, so when I got to my blind, I found it collapsed due to the snow. I was pretty annoyed to find my blind like this, but there was no choice. I would have to fix it and prop it back up again. However, something felt off. As I was fixing my blind, it felt like I was being watched. I thought it was nothing and I shook it off. After propping my blind back up, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze and everything went quiet. I slowly turned around and saw 2 bucks standing there looking at me. I was creeped out, but also confused, because this had never happened to me. They were just standing there, not moving an inch, and I couldn't even see them breathing. It was cold enough at the time to see your breath. As I looked at them, I slowly slid my rifle off my shoulder. But then all the sound came back, and the 2 bucks just walked away. After that, I knew the rest of the day would be odd. As the day went on, I still had that feeling of being watched. That feeling was coming from the way I walked in. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I heard a coyote call, but even that sounded wrong. It was distorted, like someone or something trying to do their own coyote call from memory, but failed miserably. As the sun was going down past the trees, I grabbed my rifle and backpack, then started my way up to my car. The route I take has me crossing a few fences on the property I hunt on. But as I was coming up on the last fence, that feeling of being watched came back. I immediately stopped in my tracks and looked around to see if I could see what was watching me. And then I saw it. Some kind of person or humanoid thing hunched on the fence post, looking at me. Its arms were pretty long and skinny, and it looked malnourished. It had short, patchy hair on its body, and its skin was light gray. As I stared at it more, I saw that its eyes were a deep black, almost like little voids. It had fairly pointy ears. I couldn't see a mouth or any signs of a mouth. All I could do was stand there and watch the thing, just like it was watching me. I slowly took a few steps towards it. As I took my second step, it quickly perched up. I stopped right where I was and made the foolish mistake of calling out, "Hello?" Then I saw its head tilt to the side, like a curious dog. The creature then hopped down from the fence post and stood straight up. It stood at around 6 feet tall, and its hands were almost claw-like, with long, pointy nails. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It spoke to me, like it was mimicking me when I had said hello, but distorted in much the same way as the coyote call from earlier. I tried pulling my rifle up, but it slipped out of my shaking hands and fell to the ground. After it hit the ground, I looked up to where the creature was. To my horror, it was gone. When I picked my rifle up, I quickly snapped back to reality and bolted up the hill, crossing the fence where the creature was. Then finally, I made it back to the car. Without any hesitation, I sped out of there and raced back to town. My uncle and brother told me they would be at a bar in town after they got finished in the woods, so I went there. When I walked inside, I sat next to my brother and uncle. They asked if I had seen a ghost due to how white my face was. I lied and just told them I was cold, and I needed to warm up. I didn't tell them about the creature I saw, and to this day, whenever I'm out hunting, I'm kind of freaked out by the idea of running into it again. Blackjack Drive, from Angela 5007. In 1997, we built a new home construction. Our home was 3 blocks from a place called Massard Prairie Creek Battlefields in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Within 2 weeks of moving in, I began to see an apparition of a soldier dressed in gray. I saw him every day, standing between my kitchen and living room for about 2 years. He never moved. He never spoke. Finally, one day, a friend of mine named Meredith and I decided to do a Ouija board. She tried to communicate with it, or him. From that day forward, I never saw him again. But what happened next was terrifying and haunted me for years until we finally sold the house last June. Immediately, I started to have horrific and demonic night terrors. This went on for the next 25 years that I lived in that house. At first, I started to dream about witches. Witches that would cast spells on me and torture me. They would get inside my body and cause me physical harm. Over the next several years, I had 9 surgeries for 9 different health reasons. At one point, I had a stalker who broke into my house and attacked me. He broke my neck and caused me a lot of other physical harm that I don't wish to discuss further. Then I had a throat surgery, a stomach surgery, a gallbladder surgery, 3 liver surgeries, and a lump in my breast. All of this occurred immediately after we played the Ouija board, and all these things were things that in my dreams the witches had done to me. After that, and I don't know why, we tried the Ouija board again to make it go away. Only things just took a darker turn. At this point, I started to have severe demonic night terrors. They became so horrible. They drove me to the point of a self-harm attempt, which was almost successful. I was in the hospital in the ICU for several weeks after my attempt, during which I was hallucinating the entire time of devils and demons. When I came home, things did not get any better. I immediately started to see demons in my house. I believe this was a direct result of messing around with the Ouija board, with forces we knew nothing about. I was awake one day, and I don't know if you want to call it a daydream or hallucination, or if it was my reality. I was sitting in my bed and I looked down. My wrists were tied down to the bed. I looked over and I saw my cat being sucked into the baseboards, being killed. I looked out the window, and all I saw was hell on earth. The entire world was on fire, and there were mounds of dirt as big as mountains. These mountains of dirt had white doors on them and had animals and babies nailed to them. At the time, I had 4 boys of my own, and they were all nailed to the doors, along with 2 of my dogs. I watched in horror as construction equipment with buckets on the front went forward and chopped their bodies in half. To this day, I am terrorized by this vision. It all seemed so real at the time. I became plagued with sleep paralysis and sightings of demons and what I call the old hag. My husband thought I was insane. He had me committed a number of times. It wasn't until we finally sold the house and moved away that everything stopped. Last year, we sold the house and moved to another state. Since leaving, the strange and disturbing activity has come to an end.
Struggling to find something for everyone on your list? Bob's Discount Furniture can help. Shop Bob's super selection of great gifts, from deluxe dining sets with storage and nap-ready recliners with all the bells and whistles to oh-so-soft Bobopedic sofas and beautiful budget-friendly bunk beds. All available at everyday low prices that will keep your holiday shopping haggle and hassle-free. So stop into your nearest store, shop online at mybobs.com, and holiday the Bob's way. Oh my Bob.
Saying goodbye. From Putrid Decay. I'm going to start by saying I know my actions were dumb, but I'm a spooky gal, and I would probably do it again. This happened a few years ago, when my husband and I were staying with his 96-year-old great-grandmother in Appalachia. His family has a 300-acre cattle farm, and we needed somewhere to stay while saving for a house. And the great-grandmother, Miss Mary, needed someone to make sure she didn't fall or have an accident. As I said, I'm a spooky gal, and as you can imagine, there isn't much to do in the middle of nowhere. So I started testing my Appalachian knowledge by whistling at night. The first night, nothing happened. But in the morning, one of our chickens had died. I didn't really connect those things, but then every morning for 3 days, we'd wake up to a dead chicken. No obvious cause of death, no sickness. It wasn't abnormally hot or cold outside. Then I tried to whistle during the daytime, thinking maybe I'd see something if I tried during the day. As soon as noise left my mouth, the branch of a big old oak tree out front broke with a loud crack, and a bug flew into my face. That's not to say it flew into me by accident. It flew at me repeatedly, smacking my face until I stopped whistling. It was almost as if even the insects knew I was being dumb. I stopped whistling after that. I wasn't exactly scared, but I trusted that what I was doing could be putting us all at risk. Months passed with no incident, but a few days before we moved out, I was listening to Nightfall by Kavinsky. My husband was working nights and Miss Mary was in the hospital. Thankfully, nothing serious. Just getting fluids and combating a cold. Although maybe that was serious for a 96-year-old. The song starts and some of the lyrics sounded too loud to me. I want to drive you through the night, down the hills. Suddenly, my body started to feel as if I was underwater. I'm gonna tell you something you don't want to hear. I don't know how, but I knew whatever heard my whistle before was here now. I'm gonna show you where it's dark, but have no fear. I felt numb, not cold or scared or excited, but numb. I then went outside. Immediately, I was greeted by a rabbit standing just off the porch. Right away, I was greeted by a rabbit standing just off the porch, staring directly at me. I don't know how long we watched each other, but eventually the rabbit took a few hops towards the back of the house, where the woods are, and where the chicken coop is. Then it looked back at me, as if asking me to follow it. So I did. You've never seen darkness quite like Appalachian darkness. It's so dense, you feel it in all of your senses. Or at least, I did. As I followed the rabbit closer and closer to the chicken coop, unable to make out anything in the absence of light, every hair on my body began to stand up. My heart started to pound, and I finally felt afraid. Something was waiting for me. I slowly turned around, trying to appear more calm than I was, and I walked back to the front of the house. Just before I stepped out of the darkness, I looked back, and I said out loud, "We're moving in a couple of days. If you follow me, I'll talk with you then." I know I'm the dumb white chick that dies in horror movies that everyone screams at, but it felt like they wanted to talk, so I went inside and shut the door. My entire body got hot, like the worst hot flash you can imagine. I was sweating and shaking. I never saw anything in Appalachia, but I'm pretty sure it saw me. I haven't had any weird experiences since then, and Miss Mary hasn't either. I don't know why it didn't kill me. Maybe it did just want to talk. But something exists in those mountains. Something you should be afraid of. The Pig Below the Window. From Leia. This story is quite short, but it scarred me for life, so bear with me. We'll call my sister T for the sake of her privacy. I was around 10 or 12 years old. I am unsure of the exact age. I recall the night being a bit blurry. I was in my sister's room, and we were hanging out as we usually did every few nights. Now, we didn't have a set bedtime back then, so I was prepared to stay awake all night. My time in her room was easygoing, as it always was. Of course, we'd have the occasional argument, but other than that, I'd look forward to my visits with her. Just like any other night, I expected this one to be the same as all the other visits. T was sitting in her chair doing her nightly routine. It wasn't much more than just taking off her makeup and such. The usual girl stuff. While she was doing that, I was standing up sort of near her chair on my phone. Nothing much occurred for those few hours we were hanging out. Our parents were still awake, as they usually stayed up a little late. It wasn't until T got up to head to the bathroom. I was still standing, captivated by something on my phone, so I didn't really notice her absence. A couple of minutes went by, and I heard faint oinking, of all things. Mind you, we do live in a town where livestock is not allowed within city limits. But as a young kid, I wasn't aware of the law, and I was curious about the sound I was hearing outside. T's room had a big window with curtains. I approached the window and pulled the curtains over my head. It was night, and her light was on, so I cupped my hands and pressed my forehead against the window to get the best view of our backyard. I saw nothing until my eyes darted around to the ground, just below the window. From what I could see, it appeared to be a small pig. It was pink, and I heard oinking. From the moment I saw it, it felt like I was immediately put into a trance. The world around me suddenly didn't exist. My only focus was this pig on the ground, with an occasional oink leaving its mouth. It only lasted a few minutes, with me staring at it, but it felt like ages. Now, I've heard other stories saying they were put into a trance like that, and had the urge to leave the safety of their home to see what was there. And I now know what that feeling is like. My eyes never left this pig. All the while my body was urging me to go outside, to walk out into the backyard and grab this baby pig. The moment I decided that I was going to leave the room and head outside, it was like whatever that thing was sensed my soon-to-be arrival. And in an instant, whatever that thing was darted under our house in under a nanosecond. It moved so unnaturally fast, my body barely had time to process it. The only reason I was brought back to my senses was the squeal it let out as it ran. Now, this was no regular pig squeal. It was as if something was making an attempt to sound like one, but was unsure of how an actual pig squeal should sound. When I heard that unnatural scream, I threw myself away from that window, and I immediately broke down in tears. T came rushing into her room, asking what was wrong, what had happened. I could barely conjure words. Around 5 minutes later, I told her what happened, and then, together, we told our parents. I'm not sure if they entirely believed us, but my dad went outside with a bat to be sure, but to no avail, as he didn't find anything. Since that night, I never dared to look out any windows when it was nighttime, as I'm too afraid to encounter what I saw that unfaithful night. What do you think this pig-looking thing was?
Most people don't know that you can get a domain from Squarespace. Not just a website. But you're not most people, because now you know you can get a domain from Squarespace. Something like velvetchords.com for your music studio. Or kidchords.com for your middle school band camp. Whatever your dream, Squarespace is how you make it happen, all under one roof. Get yours before it's gone with offer code MAKEITREAL for 10% off your domain or website. Terms and conditions apply.
Why I Believe in the Dog Man, from Rovis339. Every kid in my hometown had a climbing tree. Mine was a massive oak behind the Polk farm, maybe a 10-minute bike ride from our subdivision. The trunk split into 3 main sections about 6 feet up, creating this perfect platform where 4 or 5 kids could sit comfortably. We'd spend entire summer days up there. Me, my best friend Corey, his little brother Jamie, and usually 1 or 2 kids from the neighborhood. This was back in 2004, when parents didn't track every move you made, and a bunch of 11-year-old kids could disappear into the woods for 8 hours without anyone calling the cops. As long as we were home by dinner, nobody asked questions. The Polks didn't mind us being on their property either, as long as we didn't mess with the cattle or leave trash around. The tree sat at the edge of about 40 acres of mixed forest and pasture. From up in the branches, you could see the fence line where the cows grazed, the creek that cut through the property, and deeper into the woods where older kids said there was an abandoned hunting cabin. We had carved our initials into the bark, and we hung a rope swing from one of the lower branches. We attempted a clubhouse, basically just a makeshift platform between two limbs that we called our lookout post. The first time I saw it was in late June. Corey and I were alone that day. Jamie had strep throat, and the other kids were at some church day camp. We'd been up in the tree since that morning, reading comic books and eating the sandwiches my mom had packed. It was hot, maybe 90 degrees, and even in the shade of the leaves we were sweating. Corey was trying to hit a fence post with acorns when he stopped mid-throw and grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward the creek. There was something moving through the tall grass near the water. At first, I thought it was one of the Polk's dogs. They had these two German shepherds that sometimes roamed around, but it wasn't upon closer inspection. This thing would take a few steps on what must have been 4 legs, then rise up on 2 and move around that way before dropping back down. You'd think it was a bear after seeing that, right? But these movements were more fluid than a bear, like it was equally comfortable and not at all awkward between 2 or 4 legs. When it came out of the grass onto the muddy creek bank, I got my first real look at it. The body was covered in dark brown fur, matted and filthy with mud or something worse. But it wasn't uniformly covered. There were patches where pale skin showed through, especially around what I guess you'd call its chest and stomach. The head was elongated like a dog's, but the snout was shorter than it should be, compressed somehow. And when it turned in our direction, I could see its eyes were forward-facing. Predator eyes, yellow-brown and very smart-looking. The thing that really got me were its front legs. When it was on all fours, they bent like human arms, not like a dog's legs. I could see things that looked more like fingers in the mud there, leaving prints that weren't quite hands, but definitely weren't paws. It was eating something too. We watched it tear into what looked to be a rabbit, maybe a possum. It was holding the carcass up to its mouth with those not-quite hands. The sounds it made were wet and crushing, bones breaking and meat tearing. Every few seconds it would stop and look around, scanning the area while it chewed. Corey and I didn't move, didn't even breathe loud. We sat in that tree for probably 20 minutes watching this thing eat, both of us knowing without discussing it that climbing down was no option. When it finished, it did something that still makes my skin crawl. It cleaned itself like a person would, used its tongue on those hand things, then rubbed its face. Grooming, not messy licking like dogs do. Then it stood fully upright, probably 6.5 feet tall, and walked back into the grass. Not a loping gait or bounding. It walked with a slightly hunched posture, but definitely bipedal. We stayed in the tree another hour before finally getting the courage to climb down. Once we did, we biked home faster than we'd ever ridden before. We didn't talk about it, not that day, not for weeks later. We kept going back to the tree, but never alone, and never past 4 in the afternoon. The second time was in August, right before school started back up. There were 5 of us that day. Me, Corey, Jamie, and 2 kids from the next street over. They were Tommy and his sister Angie. We'd been up in the tree all afternoon playing some elaborate game where we were survivors in a zombie apocalypse, and the tree was our home base. Kid stuff. Fun kid stuff. At one point, Jamie had to go pee, so he climbed down and went to the designated spot we used. This thick cluster of bushes about 30 feet from the tree. We had a whole system, you see. You announced where you were going, did your business quick, and you came right back. Nobody went into the actual woods alone. He'd been gone maybe 2 minutes when we heard him scream. Not a jokey or playful scream or even a hurt scream. This was pure terror. We scrambled down so fast, Tommy fell the last 5 feet and knocked the wind from himself. Jamie came running out of the bushes, his face white, pointing back at the woods and trying to talk, but only managing these hiccuping sobs. "It's there, it's there, it's there," he kept saying. Corey grabbed his brother, trying to calm him down, while the rest of us stared at the woods. I don't know what made me look up instead of into the bushes. Maybe some primitive instinct, maybe just dumb luck. It was in a pine tree, about 40 feet away, maybe 15 feet off the ground. It was sitting there in a thick branch, watching. In the daylight, I could see more details I'd missed before. Its fur wasn't uniform in color. Darker on the back and limbs, and lighter on the belly, with those strange bald patches I mentioned, around the joints where the skin was thick and gray. The face was, I don't know how to describe it. Like someone had tried to push a human skull into the shape of a dog's head, but stopped halfway through. The mouth went too far back, showing too many teeth even when closed. But it was the way it sat that was truly wrong. It wasn't perched like an animal. It was sitting like a person would sit on a bench, legs hanging or dangling down, one hand thing gripping the branch, while the other hung loose at its side. Casual, comfortable. It watched us watching it. No aggression, no threat display, just observation. Like it was memorizing us. Angie started to cry. Tommy threw up, and it tilted its head at the sound, interested but not excited. The way you might look at something mildly amusing on the TV. "Back up," Corey said quietly. "Everyone back up slowly." We did, moving as a group toward our bikes. The thing in the tree didn't move except to turn its head, tracking our movement. When we reached the bikes, I made the mistake of looking back one more time. I'll never forget that. I swear to you, this is what I saw. It was smiling. Doing something at least that looked like smiling. The corners of its mouth pulled back, showing more teeth. But there was no aggression to it. It was mimicry. It had seen us smiling up in our tree and looked to be trying it out on us. We didn't go back to the climbing tree after that. We made excuses when other kids asked us why. We started to hang out at the park in town instead, where there were people and lights and nowhere for something to sit and watch. My family moved to Ohio that winter for my dad's job. Corey and I lost touch after a few emails. Years later, I found him on Facebook, and I even asked him if he remembered that summer. He said how could he forget? But beyond that, he didn't want to talk about it. He said that Jamie has nightmares even still sometimes. I looked up the area recently on Google Earth. The Polk farm is apparently gone, probably sold, had been developed into more subdivisions it looked like. The woods got cleared for a shopping center. Our climbing tree is probably someone else's backyard now, or maybe it just got cut down entirely. My own kids love climbing trees. I let them, of course, but I pick the trees carefully. Ones with good visibility, nowhere for anything else to perch nearby. And they come inside well before dusk, no exceptions. They don't need to know why their dad always checks the higher branches first. Believe you me, if I told them why, none of us would be getting any sleep for a while. Shadow on the Classroom, from Rory Aragon. For context, both my family and the families of my friends have had experiences with spirits or unexplained phenomena. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, and I was hanging out with my usual friend group, Cameron and Logan. Notably, Cameron's dad is a frequent ghost hunter, often venturing out weekly with paranormal investigation gear. Logan, intrigued by this, had always wanted to try ghost hunting for himself. Near Cameron's house is an abandoned school with a chilling reputation. According to the local stories, the child was murdered there by a homeless man. The tragedy allegedly led to the school's permanent closure. Drawn by curiosity and maybe a bit of recklessness, we decided to explore the school ourselves at midnight using Cameron's dad's gear. None of us had ever gone ghost hunting before, but it had always been something we talked about. As midnight approached, we grabbed the equipment and headed to the school before we could talk ourselves out of it. From the moment we stepped onto the school grounds, something didn't feel right. Cameron had brought a Ouija board, which he pulled out from the gear bag and placed on a desk inside room 31, a detail that might prove important later. While the board sat undisturbed, we spread out the rest of the equipment across nearby rooms. A spirit box in room 32, dowsing rods in room 33, and EMF detectors and roach sensors in room 30. We intentionally kept everything close together, in case we needed to leave quickly. We started in room 32 with the spirit box, asking basic questions and listening closely. At one point, I caught a glimpse of a shadow from the corner of my eye. Assuming it may have been my imagination, I brushed it off. It was late after all, and this wasn't the first time I thought I saw something. Feeling a bit hungry, I told my friends I was going to grab a snack from the backpack we left in room 31. They stayed behind, still focused on the spirit box. As I walked down the hall, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A distinct shadow of a man standing at the school's entrance. Thinking it might have been a cop or maybe a security guard, I rushed back to my friends to tell them. Cameron and I went to check, but no one was there. Still unnerved, I returned to room 31 to grab a bag of chips. That's when I saw these 3 photographs of students on the whiteboard, each marked with crude, angry X's. The pictures had not been there earlier. As I tried to make sense of it, I noticed the Ouija board was out of its box. None of us had taken it out yet. Panicking, I ran back to my friends, trying not to scream. I told them what I saw, but they dismissed it, joking that I was just being crazy or goofy. Honestly, I was tired and started to believe that myself. We resumed the spirit box session, and for a while nothing happened. But then, we heard a voice, deep and raspy and unmistakably real. It had said one word: "Run." We wrote it down in our notebooks and tried to ask follow-up questions, but we couldn't get any further responses. We then moved on to check the EMF detectors in room 30. The moment we entered, the detectors spiked uncontrollably. Freaked out, we turned everything off and began to pack up. As we gathered the last of our gear, we returned to room 31 to retrieve the backpack and the Ouija board. Then Logan suggested we try using it first, just once before we left. Cameron and I hesitated, but eventually agreed. When we entered the room, we froze. The Ouija board was out of its box again, and the disturbing student photos were still on the whiteboard. Only now did my friends fully realize something was wrong. We quickly began packing everything up, and as we were doing so, I felt this icy chill going down my spine. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned around. A tall, shadowy figure of a man stood behind us. His form was dark and blurred at the edges, almost like static. I stared at it for a moment. Then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. When I looked over at my friends, they saw it too, apparently. That night changed something in all of us. It's been a while since, and we still go ghost hunting. But we haven't gone back to that school. Not yet, anyway. Stories about werewolves and dogmen creeping up on you when you're sleeping have to be some of the scariest stories out there. At least, to me. Like, if that happened to me, I'm just exposing my neck and saying, go on then, get it over with. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Send me your scary stories of the unknown at darkstories.org so I can feature them in future episodes. And leave us a review and follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to help us grow. For those adults out there that enjoy irreverent and silly comedy, you can find my explicit podcast at Night Watchers Podcast on YouTube, or search for Night Watchers on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.